Hello and welcome to episode 10 of the Keyboard Chronicles, a podcast for keyboard players of the gigging variety. I'm your host, David Holloway, and it's great to be with you again. And I'm also joined by my esteemed co-host, Paul Bindig. How are you, Paul?
I'm awesome. Thank you, David.
So we've just wrapped an interview with a very busy man, albeit he's slightly less busy at present given the circumstances we all find ourselves in. Andy Burton in recent years has completed tours with Cyndi Lauper, John Mayer, Rufus Wainwright and Little Stephen and the Disciples of Soul. Add to that an incredible discography of recordings as a session player, and you have a guy that has some great insights and some insights he did give, Paul, I found.
Yeah, I mean, certainly what I took out of it was his approach to playing with others or in a large ensemble and where you fit in that. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, so, I mean, have a listen and we'll talk more after the interview, but enjoy. Hi, Andy. Thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Great to be here. Thanks so much for asking me.
How are things going for you right at the moment? Are you managing to keep busy in these interesting times?
Yes, I'm keeping busy. We're sheltering in place like everybody else, me and my wife. And I'm about 100 miles outside New York. And I was actually in the middle of renovating my studio when this all went down. So that's been interesting, but some of it is still going on by remotely. I mean, some little, just while everyone's keeping safe, but some of the contractors, want to keep working.
Yeah.
And I don't blame them. So that's been going on, albeit at a much slowed pace. And I brought a lot of my keyboards out here with me. So I have a working recording rig, and I've been doing some remote sessions, which is great for keeping the craft going, keeping the focus going. And I'm on the east end of Long Island, which is a beautiful place. So, so other than that, and doing basic domestic tasks, everything's been pretty steady and calm.
Yeah, good stuff.
About the best you can hope for in times like these. I'm not sure how things are in the Sydney area right now.
Yeah, we're very lucky compared to the US at the moment, but obviously we're still in essentially the same sort of semi-lockdown, not meant to go out except to get food, that sort of stuff. So yeah, very similar.
Yeah.
And Andy, I was saying in the introduction to the show to Paul that I've got every reason to be jealous of most guests we interview, because we only interview notable keyboard players. But I think you in particular, because you've played with three of the artists that I would give a left leg to spend one night on stage with, let alone multiples. So we'll get into that. But can you just give our listeners a bit of a potted history of yourself, the man and the musician? Sort of how did things start out?
I come from a musical family. My mother was a multi-instrumentalist. I mean, she was a doctor, a psychiatrist by profession, but she went to High School of Music and Art in New York, and so she played piano, violin, and bassoon, and she also sang in the choir. She sang in the Robert Shaw Chorale, which was a famous chorale in its day under Arturo Toscanini. So she was doing all that, before she decided to go into medicine. So she inculcated myself and my two sisters with music at very, very early ages. And I ended up going to Manhattan School of Music for their what they call their college prep program, which was basically every Saturday from age 6 to about age 11. I would go and I would learn piano. I studied cello also. And I would sing in the choir, and I would take music theory and ear training. So I had that. That was, instead of playing baseball, that's what I was doing on weekends. So I had a real love for it right away. It was mostly classical. although I obviously I had an ear towards what was going on in the pop music world, which is where I ended up being anyway. I had an uncle that played boogie woogie piano who showed me a lot of things to offset all the Bach and the Chopin and the Hanen exercises and ragtime. You know, I played the Scott Joplin rags.
Yeah.
I got quite into that. And then ultimately I decided I wanted to forge my own path, and I didn't want to go the classical route. As much as I love music, and you know, when we get to the desert island disc part, there's some classical that I would love to be with. You know, if I had to choose, but it's some of the finest, you know, music ever made. So, but in any case, I decided, you know, I started playing in rock bands about the age of 12. My first attempt at playing in a band.
Yeah.
And had some mates early on, some friends that were, you know, we had various configurations all through junior high school and high school, and, you know, like the usual thing. But I went to Harvard for college, and I thought I was going to do something completely different for a while. I flirted with a lot of other things, but I ended up becoming a music major in the end, and studied some electronic music while I was there. We had a music lab where I got to work with old Scully tape machines,
Oh, yeah.
you know, doing musique concrète, stuff like that, working with Buchla synthesizers, as well as, you know, MIDI and sampling and all of that stuff, and sequencing. So I had a real smorgasbord of different ways of making music, and I was always very eclectic in my tastes. And so I was just, and I had a professor there, a guy named Ivan Cherepnin, who's no longer with us, unfortunately, but he was a classical composer. And he, in some of his classes, he would have us listening to, you know, anything from Tibetan monks chanting to Michael Jackson to, you know, literally anything. He was the most, what you'd say, Catholic with a small c, in terms of taste of anybody that I've ever met. And so he was a huge influence on me, just in terms of his attitude.
Yeah.
And approach, and a completely universal approach toward music. So anyway, then after that, I graduated, and I didn't want to be in academia either. So I decided I would try my luck at playing in bands. And I answered some ads I went back to New York, and I answered some ads in the Village Voice, which is another no longer existing newspaper. And I got into a band that was signed to Warner Brothers, and then I was off. You know, we made 2 records that didn't go anywhere, but I did meet a lot of the players in the bands were also studio musicians. So it was kind of a backdoor into the studio musician scene in New York at the time. So I got into that. So that became. So I lived in Hoboken, New Jersey, which was an affordable place to live, right across the river, and 20 minutes to Greenwich Village, but, you know, from my front door. So I got to, you know, I worked different scenes. What there was the studio musicians, and there was the sort of inside commercial pop world. You know, the people that also played on you know, people that worked, you know, on the. I didn't work on Madonna's records, but I worked with people that played on Madonna's records.
Okay.
And then there was the other side of the river. There was the alternative rock scene that was brewing, and I was, you know, working for less money, but, you know, cooler people sometimes. You know, so I played both sides of the fence. You know, everybody needed a keyboard player at some point. You know, it was not keyboards. I found it was I would get signed, or I'd get hired by a band when they would get signed to a record label, and then they would let me go as soon as they lost their deal. That was my. I was in and out of a lot of situations that way, but they wanted the keyboards to up the ante musically, and so I did so I was knocking around New York for quite a few years, and I played some. I just sort of went with whatever I thought was cool, whatever seemed like the coolest thing that I could get into at the time. I played for years with great rock and roller Ian Hunter. I was with him for about 8 years, and we toured. I did a lot of touring with him in America and Europe. We never made it to Australia.
No, sadly. Yeah.
Sadly, I've been trying to get him to come over there. I hope he's had some health issues, and I sincerely hope he fully recovers and is able to come to Australia. But then when I started getting tours, my first kind of world tour was with Rufus Wainwright, and that was actually my first time coming to your shores. That was back in 2012. Rufus is an insanely talented singer-songwriter, composer. He's written operas. He's just he's a real prodigy. So I got to play Sydney Opera House with him, which was definitely I would say a live performance career highlight for me.
Yeah.
One of the, he was great. And I got to play all kinds of places like Israel that I'd never been to before. I'd never played before. And of course your lovely country and New Zealand as well. And let's see, after that it was John Mayer, which was a totally different scene. Much more inside pop, as you know. But he was preparing for his scene that he's in now, which is he kind of has a dual track career. He's got his solo career, which is focusing on his pop material somewhat, and then he's also got the Dead and Company thing, which is he was looking for the Grateful Dead audience. They are some of the most loyal fans in the world, and he liked to jam out and he likes to play. So when I played with him, he was basically almost like, it seemed in retrospect, preparing for that, because he had the band that he put together were all great soloists, and we did a lot of jamming and we did a lot of trading solos, which is really fun in front of 10 or 15,000 or more, to be just playing whatever, just feeling the moment and playing it, improvising, taking a song in any number of directions in front of a crowd that large. They're following you. That's another career highlight, just that gig in general. And he treated us so well.
And you raise a good point there, Andy, about the trading solos, and also back to your comment on playing on both sides of the fence, and it probably links to the next question, which was, you played for acts like, as you said, Rufus Wainwright, John Mayer, Ian Hunter, Cyndi Lauper. Can you compare and contrast the different ways these bands have worked for you and a run? So your role within them, but just your observations on how different bands have run as far as willingness to experiment on stage versus more rigid, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, well, I would say that with John, it was by far of say like the four, say, large world tour level acts that I've been with in the last several years. John was by far the most free in that sense, because he was deliberately going for that improvisational aesthetic, which is really something in contrast to his pop material. The way we would go and we would take some of his songs and stretch them out, and they could go anywhere. Now, that's not to say anything disparaging about the others, but Rufus, we worked out very, he had very dense orchestrational kind of material, that a lot of it very inspired by Italian opera and French classical music. And I had my hands full. I had to offload some of my keyboard playing onto a saxophonist who also played keyboards. I had my hands full, but it was all completely arranged. And really the same applies to Cyndi. A lot of the stuff with Cyndi, particularly the famous, the radio hits, her signature songs, I was copying the records as much as I could. You do end up bringing a little bit of yourself into it no matter what. But there's a lot of sounds that people expect to hear on her records. It was that whole the whole I don't know, if you will, that 1983 sound.
Yeah.
There was all of those, the Roland Juno synths and the and the Oberheims and the DX7s, like that whole aesthetic. Those sounds are signature, and you miss them if you don't hear them. If you don't hear that pad on Time After Time, it comes in. It has a peculiar kind of warmth to it, even though it's we won't get too technical, but I don't know how technical. I guess you said I can get as technical.
Yeah, go for it.
Please do.
Well,
Please do.
The synthesizers of the 80s, the polyphonic analog synths of the 80s. There were the ones that used discrete oscillators and the ones that used digitally controlled oscillators. So the DCO synths are a little thinner sounding, like the Roland Juno, but that sound somehow manages to be warm in its own way. And so when that sound, I used Nords with Cyndi. And I was able to get fairly close. At one point, I was using an OB6 on the last tour that I did with her, a summer tour that we did with Rod Stewart. I had 2 Nords and an OB6, and the OB6 really helped me get closer to those sounds because it was just the discrete oscillators on there made it really just not, even doing a Juno type sound on it. It has a warmth to it.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that was I'm very what's the word? I'm just very, very picky about textures for myself, probably more than I need to be for certain gigs. But I really wanted to capture those sounds. So with Cyndi, it was very much about doing what was done on the record, and and the same with Steven. With Steven, I played on the records. At least the recent records, and so I had a say in making the parts. But I was doing definitely the work of 2 people. We had 2 keyboard players in Steven's band, but we sounded like 3, and I was doing 2 of them. I was playing B3 and synthesizers, pretty much constantly. Pretty much on almost every song, I was doing both at the same time. And with Steven's material, I'm not sure how familiar with all of this stuff he did, because it wasn't as successful as Cyndi or John in terms of being inevitables. Yeah. Sun City was probably the biggest thing that he did.
Yeah.
That the mainstream would know about. But on that, there's a lot of Oberheims and Prophet 5s on those records. And so the OB6 came in really handy for that. But I'd be playing something very precise, like almost sometimes a sequenced part I would be playing by hand. And at the same time, I'd be wailing, doing soulful, gospel-y, bluesy B3.
Yeah.
At the same time. So it's like splitting your brain in 2. And so that was, but absolutely arranged every note. We had a 15-piece band. You saw the show, didn't you?
I did. David? So, and we're going to go, thanks to my obsession with this stuff, in great depth on the Van Zandt stuff. Yeah, but it's. I said to Paul prior to recording that's easily one of the highest quality sounding shows I've ever seen.
We had a fantastic sound guy. We had Peter Gabriel's guy.
Right. Well, that explains that.
It explains it. Richard Sharrett. He's one of the best sound guys I've ever worked with. And I've worked with some real good ones. Chad, who works with John Mayer, is also worthy of mentioning. He's an amazing sound guy too. But yeah, but to get that many musicians, that was such a thrill, that tour with Stephen.
Actually,
because,
Andy, that is a really interesting project. Can I ask you how you came to be involved with that at the outset? How did that all come about?
let's see, where did I got the recommendation? Well, the musical director, Mark Ribler, asked me to do it. Mark is a guitar player, and he had been working with Stephen on Darlene Love's comeback record.
Yeah.
Which is a really good record. But I also, totally coincidentally, I had worked with Darlene for many years. At least 5 years I've worked with Darlene. And she's a powerhouse singer. And we would sometimes do Christmas shows, and Stephen would sometimes be a guest, although I can't say that I met him through that, or that in any way led to me working with Stephen. But basically, I worked with Darlene and I had worked with Mark, and both of them had worked with Stephen. And when Stephen got asked to play, he was flying to London to play Bill Wyman's 80th birthday. He was just being asked to sit in as a guest. Bill Wyman was doing a concert with his band with a lot of guests, and Stephen was asked to do it. And the promoter said, well, if we're going to fly you all the way to London, why don't you do a couple of shows while you're here? It ended up being just one, but he put together a band just to do this one show. And it was and he asked Mark, who he had worked with on the Darlene record, he produced it. Mark put a band together, and Mark called me. And so we did the whole thing started out as a one-shot thing, where we played in London, at the theater within the O2 in London. I can't remember the name of it. The O2, some kind of precious stone name. I can't remember. Anyway, that was that. And we had so much fun that he said, let's make a record. So when that came, when we all got back, we got into the studio and we made a record. And then a tour the following year, and then another tour, and then another tour, and here we are. But we ended up with a solid 15-piece band with 5 horn players and 3 backing vocalists, and it was quite a thrill. But that basically how I got into it, and then it was basically I had to get over the hump of getting to know Stephen and working with him, which once you get over the hump is one of the best. He's like your best friend.
Yeah, and so that's a fascinating point you make there. And this is all assumption. I don't even expect you to confirm it, but obviously Stephen's role in E Street and with Bruce is his sort of right-hand man all those years, that he's learnt from the best as far as being a band leader, and I can imagine he's exacting, but once you cover what he needs, he's an extremely good boss. He's the best. Yeah. You know, I can't say anything but good things about him in terms of how he deals with people, how he treats musicians. I mean, he took us all over the world. We traveled, and we as though we were the E Street Band. We stayed in the same hotel. We flew around the same way they do. He got us into all the cool places in Monte Carlo and stuff like that we would never go to. We got to see life from that point of view, which is a really interesting point of view. And you've mentioned the 15 pieces, and I've already said that it's one of the best sounding tours I've ever heard. Can you describe what the rehearsal process and the experience of playing as such a large ensemble compared to some of your other work?
Yeah, well, you would imagine that with a band that large, that we would say, all right, well, the rhythm section is getting together. We'll go over the songs for the first day or 2 days, and then we'll bring the horns in, and then we'll bring the backing vocals in. That's sort of the normal way of rehearsing a larger ensemble. You start out, you do sectionals. Maybe the singers would get together on their own, or the horn players would get together on their own. That's not how Stephen did it. Stephen wants everybody there. Stephen wants all 15 musicians there. Now, maybe there'll be some side rehearsals, but we start rehearsal everybody has to be there. Everybody's there, punctual. And the reason why is because he wants to hear everything now. He wants to hear the whole thing. And he might have an idea for a backing vocal part. He might seconds later have an idea for the horns. And he's not going to sit there with a keyboard and use a horn sample and try it out and have me play it as a horn, with samples and try out different voicings. He's going to have the actual horn players there. And there's one guy, Eddie Mannion, who is the head of the horn section, and he plays Barry, sax in the band, and he's got a Barry in one hand and a laptop in the other. And as soon as he hums the parts, Eddie's right there with his laptop entering it into Sibelius.
Yeah.
It's literally right then. It's all done on the spot right there. And that's a really interesting way to work. Most people wouldn't do it because it's too expensive.
Yeah.
Because, sometimes while they're working parts out, I'm twiddling my thumbs, waiting for them to come up, waiting for him to hear. And he doesn't know theory. So he can't tell you, okay, do a major 7 with he won't say that. He won't be like a dominant 7 flat, flat 9. Or he'll play each note on the guitar and have each horn player match the note, and it will be painstaking. But it's amazing what comes out in the end. It's all there in his head. It just takes a little while, and he has his method, and it's like nothing I've ever seen really or experienced. It was such an amazing experience just to watch how his mind works, as he would come up with the stuff lightning fast. And then he was just telling everybody what to do one after another. And he wanted to hear, he has like very, very, very short attention span. And,
I'd assume that. Yeah.
Yeah. And for me, that was a huge challenge, because when he would have a keyboard idea, I'd have to, there's no like, hold on, Steven, let me just program that for you. Hold on. I'll be with you. Give me about 10 minutes with the headphones. I'll come up. None of that. It had to be right now.
Yeah.
You had to, I pretty much, after a little while, I learned what sounds he tended to go for, and I would tend to have them ready at the touch of a button. I could always add glockenspiel to he wants more glockenspiel. I got it. One button push and there. Boom. On top of anything, I can add a layer. And sometimes I would anticipate that. But I would throw things at him, and you never know where it would go. You never know what it would lead to. And it might not even be a musical thing. I brought, there's one song on the latest record that I ended up playing a synth solo at the end of. A song called Education.
Oh, yep.
And I played it on the OB6 on the record, and for the it just felt to me like we were getting ready to rehearse. It just felt boring to me to be up there on my riser playing it on the synth. Just because I tend to come forward on more, like I would come forward and play accordion on a song or something like that. There was no opportunity for me to leave my little castle. So I took a chance and got a Roland guitar. And so I showed it to him, and he was like, all right, give it a shot. So I came forward and I played the solo on the guitar, just feeling like kind of a doofus, but what the hell? I just, I need to break out every once in a while from being up there on the riser. And so he said, all right, I think it'll work, but you got to get a new hat. I ended up with this badass hip hop Stacey Adams brim, which is the coolest hat I've ever owned. I didn't really own it, but it was the coolest hat I've ever had to wear. It's this bright red thing right out of a gangster rap video. And all because I decided to play that synth solo. And there's 1,000 other stories I can tell you like that, where just completely random things will develop that you would have never thought would turn into anything. Like how we ended up in a movie. We ended up in a movie with Kurt Russell.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And that was all just because we decided to play this Ramones song in a sound check. It was a Christmas song, and it turned from a sound check into, hey, let's play it on the gig, into, hey, let's record we record everything in multi-track anyway.
Yeah.
So then we have a live recording, and let's send it to Bob Clearmountain to get mixed.
Wow.
And then, we're going to release it. Let's do a video. And then from there, it was Chris Columbus, the filmmaker, saw the video and wants us in the movie.
Yeah.
So this is just one strand in the life of Steven Van Zandt.
I'm about to say, yeah, I can imagine it's
an incredible individual, an incredible guy.
I can imagine it's a very organic experience, to say the least, from what you're saying.
Absolutely. And some part of me always wanted to play in a soul review. I mean, it scratched a very old itch. I wanted to, I remember seeing film footage of the Stax review.
Yeah.
From 1967. There's a great, I don't know if it's been released. It may have been released. My wife used to work for a film archive.
Okay.
And they used to represent, well, they still do represent things like the Ed Sullivan Show in the States and many European shows and other music TV shows. They concentrate on music footage. And they had this footage, and I got the unexpurgated footage of the Stax review. And man, did I want to be Booker T.
Yeah.
I wanted to be that. I wanted to, that always seemed like the coolest job in the world, being him.
And the Soul Review's a perfect description of it, because, I mean, obviously the record was called Soulfire for good reason as well. But yeah, with 15
and the band,
the band was incredible, and it definitely. I'd never obviously seen a Soul Review either. It had that vibe perfectly. And it's obviously the selection of musicians, and that probably links to another question about that specific tour. Is obviously you were one of two keyboard players, and Lowell Levenger was your brother in arms there. Do you want to explain a little bit about him and how you two work together? Because he's a bit of a large legend that I assume Steve picked out specifically of his love of that older music.
Yeah, well, Steven was a Youngbloods. He saw the Youngbloods back in the 60s when he was a kid. He was always a big fan of Banana, as they call him. He's, in fact, let's see. Well, he was just a sort of a legend in my mind before. I mean, I only found out about him through Steven, because I knew about the Youngbloods, but I didn't know specifically about any of the members and who they were, except for Jesse Colin Young. But when I was playing on the first record I did with Steven, I played a Wurlitzer part on one track, and Steven was really happy with what I did, and he was like, "Man, you made my day. You sound just like this guy Banana. Have you ever heard of Banana?" And I was like, "Banana?" It's like, "The Youngbloods, man." I said, "Oh, the Youngbloods. Yeah, I know the Youngbloods." So he then played me Sir Francis Drake, which is an instrumental.
Okay.
With that Wurlitzer part. I was like, that was from what year? I don't know, 69, I think. Anyway, so I thought, well, that's really good. That's really cool. And then the next thing I found out about him was he was in the band. It's like, wow, is he still alive? My God. All right. Yeah, he's alive and well. He's living in the Bay Area, San Francisco area. And so then he was with us, and so he ended up dusting off his old Wurlitzer from the Youngbloods days, and so that became part of his rig, which was great. So he basically did most of the piano and obviously the Wurlitzer stuff,
right?
And I did basically everything else. I did some piano also, but it was mainly in the sort of in the bed, in the mix when we were doing he would have, I basically set, other than his Wurlitzer, he wasn't that familiar with modern keyboard technology.
Yeah.
So I had to, so I kind of helped him get set up. I got him a Korg Grand Stage digital piano so he can, for the piano parts. And also we ended up getting into some of the other sounds in there. It was quite helpful. And then, Whirly was his thing. So, he got his own little spotlight. You probably saw him have his little spotlight where he did a little bit of Sir Francis Drake on his own.
Yes.
Yeah. So, basically, we just have our turf, we stay out of each other's way, I concentrate on the organ and executing all those synth parts, and I've got 5 things to do, and he gets to be Banana,
That's right.
So he gets to do what he feels, and that's great. And so that's much more his wheelhouse. He comes from that San Francisco school of playing, and he also plays a lot of tenor guitar and mandolin. He plays mandolin in the show, and he has a whole kind of bluegrass side to him, which we touch upon somewhat in the show. We get to use a little bit of that, and so that's more of his wheelhouse. And I'm much more, on one hand, the technical guy, and on the other hand, also the soloist, the B3 guy, the jack of all trades on the keyboard world in the band. So that's kind of how we divvy up our roles. He's got, in terms of offstage, he is he has incredible stories to tell. He's just a beautiful guy.
Yeah.
So it's a pleasure to know him, as well as everyone else in the band. We've got some absolutely fantastic musicians.
Yeah.
The great rhythm section. I'll just briefly mention, Mark Ribler and Jack Daly on bass, who played with Lenny Kravitz for years, and Richie Mercurio on drums. And we had a great horn section, a lot of illustrious people. We had Ron Tooley on trumpet, who played with James Brown in the 60s.
Wow.
He played on Papa's Got a Brand New Bag. He played on I Got You, I Feel Good, Man's World. He played on these classic records.
That's incredible.
And you could have just looked him up in the phone book, and say you want to go on tour.
Yeah.
And he was there, and man, did he have stories. Between Banana and Ron, we had the whole history of music from the 60s to the present. Ron Tooley played with John Lennon. Anyway, so that was just one of the stories that were told, and the camaraderie off stage was, every bit as great as the music.
Yeah, it's great. And so 2 very short questions on Disciples Souls before we move on to other stuff.
Sure.
Number one, I assume the tour had completed before all the lockdown, and is Stephen considering future stuff, obviously needing to work around E Street and so on?
Yeah, I think he is certainly considering it, and I think he has ambitions to get back out. I won't speak for him.
No.
But I know that Bruce is due for an E Street tour, and I presume that will happen. I have no knowledge. I have no inside.
That's all right. Yeah,
whatsoever.
I'm not digging for it either.
But I presume that he'll probably. My guess is that Bruce will probably tour next year.
Yeah, that's my guess.
2021. And if we manage to get something in there, that would be great. But I'm not expecting anything.
No.
But then again, I don't expect anything except the unexpected.
That's right.
With Steven, you never know where he's going to pop up and something else entirely is going to come together. Because everything that's happened has been, from the very beginning with him, it's been, well, can you do this one gig? And then that turned into 3 years of touring.
That's right.
And being in a movie and being on stage with Paul McCartney.
That's right.
You couldn't. If you had told me, if you told me that was going to happen, I would have just laughed at you.
That's right. Well, that leads to my last one, which is a little hypothetical, and I'm not even asking you, would you say yes, because I can't imagine you wouldn't say yes, but God forbid Charlie or Roy are sick for one show and they need a replacement for one night, but you've got 2 weeks' notice. What's your reaction? Are you feeling nauseous or just excited?
You mean if they said, Andy Burton, we want you to play
just for one night?
Let's get this hypothetical straight here. I've been asked, which I have not been.
No.
Okay. I've been asked to fill in. I would be excited as hell.
Yeah.
I've played with, Bruce has joined us on stage.
Yeah.
So I won't say I've played with Bruce. Bruce has sat in with the Disciples several times. And, he is absolutely someone I admire, like, just as I'm getting tongue-tied talking about it.
Yeah.
He's a legend, We've hung out with him backstage, and he can be a totally normal guy.
Yeah.
We've rehearsed with him sitting there on the couch just watching us, but he takes everything in, and he sat on the side of the stage, and I have felt his eyes on me, just glancing over, just taking in what everybody was doing.
Yeah.
Not a note. He didn't miss a note of anything we were doing.
No.
And so he, it would be an honor to work with him if that ever came up. Having said that, with all respect to Charlie and to Roy, they're
legends.
Those guys, they're both fantastic, and I would call them to fill in for me anytime. Charlie and I used to fill in for each other sometimes on other gigs too. Know each other. He's a great guy.
And the reason I asked the hypothetical too, Andy, is more about, and asked about whether you'd feel nauseous or excited, is just the pure back catalogue and the scope that even trying to fill in for one night would be a gobsmacking challenge, assuming that, as you know, Bruce can throw out audibles here, there and everywhere. Yeah. So I can only imagine, as much as I'd be excited to go, like, there's no way I'd say no, the actual task of getting on top of that brief must be enormous. I couldn't even imagine it.
Well, it would certainly cause some stress. Just the preparation would. I had to do that with something like that with John Mayer. When I got the call, I was filling in. The things had not worked out with whoever they had as a keyboard player, and they had already done some shows. Some sort of warm-up shows, and John had decided that he wanted to get a new keyboard player. So the band had all been rehearsed, and so I had to learn all the material on my own, and I was only given live recording. I had the records, but the live recordings, there were issues with some of the keyboard playing that there were things he didn't like about it, so I couldn't really go by that. I had to figure out what to play based on, largely on the records, but I also knew he didn't want me to copy the records note for note either. And then what happened was we were supposed to start rehearsals. Rehearsals were starting June 27th or something like that. And then I was told we have a gig on June 26th. So the day before rehearsals, I had to play a gig. And I didn't know anybody in the band. I certainly never met John, and I had never played a note with him. And so I had to learn everything without really having a reliable guide for what I should be playing. I just had to sort of figure it out and then meet everybody and then go on stage and play. So that was, if that won't give you some gray hairs, I don't know what will. But it was fun. Ultimately, I enjoyed the challenge. So if something like that happened, I would just, I'd drop everything. I'd listen to every Bruce record and every live version, and I would just dive into it, and hopefully come out, not embarrassing myself.
Right, which I'm sure you wouldn't. Yeah,
it would be the same with any gig.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, absolutely. No, that's excellent. Talking gear for a second, which is something that we love to do on this podcast, if you don't mind. What keyboard equipment are you in love with at present, or what would be your go-to pieces to use at the moment?
Well, now you're talking about for everything?
Like, well, you can pick the scenario. So yeah, you can sort of plug that into however you like. So yeah, it could be for maybe to take out to a live show, or maybe for working on stuff at home or studio recording. Shape the answer the way that suits you.
Okay. Well, yeah, for anything like the work that I've been doing recently, I would say my trusty Nord Stage 3. Stage I've been using Nord Stage 2s and Stage 3s for the past 8 years, and they really haven't let me down. I can get most. It has a very wide range of textures that I can get just about instantly. So I mean, they've only gotten better over the years. The Stage 3s are excellent. In terms of specific things, I really love for organ. I really love my Hammond XK5 system that I ended up using on the last Steven tour. I love my Nords and I love my Hammond XK5. But as what I'm in terms of, I'm actually, I would say the XK5 was a wonderful thing to have on the road. When I was with John, I had a B3 and a 122, a 60s model, which was fantastic. But I also had a tech that was, one of probably 5 guys in the world who can fix a B3 anywhere in the world. I had a guy named Alex Alvarez who works with Lenny Kravitz also. And he got my B3 to work in South America after it had been dropped at the port. This container had fallen 10 feet at the port. And the guts of the B3 were all over the inside of the shipping container. And he somehow had it working that night perfectly. So people like that, if you don't have a guy like that, then it's harder to work with a vintage instrument like a B3. So after getting very frustrated using a B3 with Steven, I switched to the XK5 system, and Steven didn't even notice the difference. And in fact, it worked better in a 15-piece band because I could control my volume level without affecting my tone, and I could control my tone without affecting the volume, which you can't really do with a tube, with a tube Leslie with limited power. And it was a hell of a lot more reliable. And I got this, and whatever the differences were in the tone, they were lost with it in the context of a 15-piece band. You simply aren't going to hear the subtle differences in distortion between, you'll hear it in a studio. If you had it right next to a real B3 and a vintage 122 Leslie, put them next to it, with good mics in a studio, you will hear a big difference. The 122 sounds a lot, creamier and warmer. But when you're on stage with 15 people on a stage, in a hall, in the middle, with everything loud, you just need to cut through.
Yeah.
And you need to have the sound, and it's less subtle. So I will say I truly loved having that instrument on stage, and I loved having my Nords on stage. And I love the Haken Continuum. Have you heard of the Haken Continuum?
Yes.
That is a whole new world. And once I played it for Steven, it was kind of a mistake because once he heard it, it was part of the show.
Yeah, he wanted it everywhere. Yeah.
And then it was part of the touring rig, and I never saw it again, except on stage.
Yeah.
So
right.
I like to, now that I'm off the road and now that we're all locked down, I'm getting to practice it again, which is great because it's in some ways it's like learning to play the violin. I've never had to worry about intonation before. And now any little flaw in my intonation, it makes me sound like a 7th grade violinist when I play on it.
Yeah,
So
well, I've never played
humbling.
one, but I imagine just the sheer ability to be so expressive in what you can do must be amazing with one of those.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
It's so great. It is. It's really something. And I've found ways of working it into so many different contexts. I can always, you can play a synth line on it. You can play a cello line on it.
Yeah.
You do. I mean, there's so many sounds. I've only scratched the surface of what it can do. I mean, I know some people like Rob Schwimmer. Do you know who he is?
That name rings a
Have
bell.
you heard of him?
No, I'm not familiar
He
with
is
him.
a master. He's a great keyboard player. He's also a great theremin player.
Right.
He's made whole albums of himself on theremin, and he's a master at the Haken Continuum. And I saw him. In fact, I did a gig with him, and in rehearsal, he played on his Continuum. He played like a Beethoven string quartet.
Wow.
All the parts, all the independent string lines, all the cello and the and the viola lines, and he played all. It sounded like 4 instruments playing, each with its own phrasing.
Wow.
It truly sound. And I mean, I can't do that. That's something that's maybe in 10 years, if I practice 8 hours a day, I could maybe, I mean, it's like that. So, I mean, there's not enough time in one's life to master everything you want to master.
That probably links nicely, Andy, to a question I had, which was, what are some of the biggest lessons you've learned over your career as a gigging keyboard player that, if you could pass it on to someone, what are the big lessons?
Yeah. All right. Well, let's see. Starting with music, with the actual reason you're out there, which is to play music. Start with the actual playing. Lessons, I would say, know your stuff. Know the material that you got to play. Know the songs. Know about the artist. Know the history. If your artist, the art you're working with, has a history, has a long history, get to know it. Listen to all their records. Know where they're coming from. Understand them as best you can, because you're there to help them sound good, and you're there to help them deliver their musical identity to the world. So you got to understand who they are, and you have to be support. You are there to support them, and you have to be a part of the backdrop to them. So in the case, if it's a Steven Van Zandt, or if it's a Cyndi Lauper or a John Mayer, all these people, especially, Cyndi and Steven have long discographies, really long discographies. And you got to get to know them. You understand somebody like Cyndi, you got to really know where she's coming from. And so, know the songs inside and out, know your instrument inside and out, and be able, and be quick. You got to be quick. You have to, you don't want to keep these people waiting. Yeah. If you want, that's just, and above all, and that falls under the larger category of read the room, which is to say, understand the dynamic of what's going on. You've got the artist that you're working for, but maybe you're the musical director, or maybe you're not the musical director, but who is the musical director, and who is the real musical director, or you have to understand where the ideas are coming from, and there's every band has got its own dynamic.
That's right.
Of that, and you have to understand that dynamic and who is behind everything, and what processes are going on behind everything, and that's something that's really an intuition. Like there was in every band, like in Rufus's band, we had a musical director, his bass player Brad Albetta, but even he would be the first to tell you that Rufus was his own musical director.
Yeah.
Ultimately, the artist is, but some artists take more of a hands-on role, and so things like that. You just have to understand how things flow, and how to be how to contribute positively to that flow. When I say reading, it sounds very general, but what I'm saying, but really read the room, read what's really needed and what's not needed, so you know what not to do, and how not to act. Generally, be fun, but don't draw too much attention to yourself. At the same time, be invisible. Have really good, fun things to say, and then be invisible the rest of the time. These are job security strategies, and it translates into the playing as well. When you're called upon to play a solo, that's when your marching orders call for you to be as great as possible, And if you're being featured, then okay, take the spotlight for the however many seconds that you're assigned for that, and then go back to being invisible.
That's right.
Like go play if the boss wants you to play something and do something with this part that you're doing, put something of yourself into it, then do it, and then you have to know when to go back to playing the parts from the record.
Yeah.
Or just go back to playing pads, or when to lay out. Go to play tambourine. So all of those things. I mean, I don't know if I'm answering your question.
No, I think that's good. Well, you've actually prompted me on something that's sort of an adjunct to that. That you talked about knowing the dynamic of the band and so on. Whether you're in a musical director role or just a member of the band, have you ever had to say either, no, I can't do that, or push back on a suggestion because you believe it wouldn't work artistically? And how did you manage that if you did do that?
You mean, so let me see. So you're saying, like, if the music director of a situation asked me to play something,
not that
I didn't.
Yeah, not that you refused to play it, but just more either. And I can't imagine in your case, technically there'd be something you couldn't play, but just something that either didn't feel right or like, have you been in bands where there is the level of input you can push back and say, how about I try it this way instead, or is it pretty hierarchical depending on the band you're in?
If the musical director of a band asked me to play something, or if the artist himself or herself asked me to play something, then there's no doubt I'm going to play it. And there's and I'm going to play to the best of my ability. And if there's something that I can't say it's really come up, where there's something that I really couldn't pull. I'm sorry, I can't do that.
No.
I feel like that's, I don't know if that's me, if I'm deluding myself in saying that, but, I would generally find a way to do whatever I'm asked to do. Even if it involved serious mental gymnastics, I would try to do it. And Stephen would pile things on me because he knew that I could handle it. He knew that I could. He's like, I don't know how you do that, but if you can play this 3 parts at once, I figured out how to do it. That's not to toot my own horn a little bit. That's I would try to find a way, and there usually is a way. And generally, you want to be a yes. You want to say yes, I can do that.
That's right. Yeah.
And quickly.
Yes.
I don't know if I really answered your question, but I am trying.
I think you did. No, that's good.
Yeah, excellent answer. Very helpful, actually. I think for a lot of people who listen to this podcast, who might find themselves.
Have reliable equipment. You don't want to say, "Oh, this thing broke. I'm sorry, I can't."
That's right.
So that's not as much of a problem now because people are, because things are a lot more reliable generally. But like with the B3, that was always a knife's edge. And that goes for anything, even with the Wurlitzer that Banana would take, Lowell would take on the road. Sometimes there'd be a bum note. And it's like, we almost don't have time for bum notes anymore in life.
Yeah.
Maybe after we get through this horrendous epidemic, people will have a more forgiving attitude. Maybe we'll realize what's important in life a little more, maybe. Who knows?
Yeah. Hey, Andy, what other keyboard players inspire you?
Ooh, okay. Well, we're gonna have to break it down in genre a little bit.
Yeah, go for it.
Because I'm, like I said, I have very eclectic taste. I would say in terms of early inspirations, Billy Preston was a big early inspiration. Dr. John, and then on a totally other level, Glenn Gould. And then on a totally other level, Rick Wakeman and Tony Banks from Genesis, Kerry Minnier from Gentle Giant, Larry Young on organ. Jimmy Smith, obviously. Booker T. These are all people that that I grew up in wanting to be at different times. I wanted to be all of these people. Bill Evans.
Yeah.
At one point I wanted to be Ben Folds, who I know lived in Australia for a while. I loved his songs, and I loved the fact how he was able to get piano into modern pop so well.
Yeah.
So I mean, Steve Winwood, those are all people that at one point, Stevie Wonder, God, going on. I mean, people that I wanted to be at one time or another. That I wish I'd come up with that. I wish I'd come up with that song. I wish I'd figured out. I wish I'd come up with that lick. I wish I'd been the first one to get this sound out of a mini Moog, whatever. I'm sure I'm missing some people. I wanted to be Paul McCartney. I wanted to be Elton John too. The way they played, Leon Russell, the way those people, the way they played. Later on, I wanted to be Ben Montench.
Yeah, don't we all?
Steve Naive from Elvis Costello. I mean, I love those records. I mean, I would say, at a certain point, that's what I was trying to be. I was trying to be, in some of my early, like rock bands, I was trying to be like Steve Naive and like Ben Montench. And that, those are two players that, Ian McLagan. God, I have to say him. I'm so lucky I got to meet him. It was only months before he passed. I got to meet him after a John Mayer gig. But those guys, Ian McLagan, I first heard him, I know he's with the Faces and Small Faces, but I first heard him on, the Stones, Miss You. I thought that was the coolest keyboard part, the coolest electric piano playing. Just so laid back and cool and mellow and bluesy and funky and so I let's see, what was my train of thought there? I was talking about who I wanted to be. Steve Naive and Ian McLagan and Ben Montench. Those three guys are all examples of keyboard players who were not mere sidemen. They were keyboard players where the keyboards was unapologetically an equal part of the band to the guitars.
That's right.
They were absolutely those. They had just as many signature parts on the songs as any of Mike Campbell or whatever, or any of those parts, or the guy from the Cars, Greg Hawkes. I loved the early. I mean, the synthesizer was right up there in front and center with all the tasty hooks were just as likely to be from a synthesizer as from a guitar. And that was what I wanted to be. I wanted to be in a situation where I was holding my own with the guitar players, and I've gotten to do that on occasion, and it's great when I get to do it.
Yeah, excellent. And I think for a lot of us keyboard players, it's nice when we can have our own space, and if an opportunity to be in a band allows you to do that, it's absolutely fantastic. I'm interested, Andy. Obviously, we're all dealing with things we don't want to deal with at the moment in terms of external factors keeping us cooped up. Having said that, what's coming up for you personally, music-wise, in the coming year, 18 months or so?
Oh, well, I would say, we'll see what happens we'll see what happens on the touring front. Whether if Steven goes out again or not, I imagine nobody's doing anything this year. I mean, I'm already seeing people asking me about dates in 2021. Yeah. So we'll see what happens there. As I said, we don't know if, Bruce may jump into that. So I may not be playing with Steven again until 2022. Who knows? Who knows? But in terms of what's coming up for me, I'm working on my own stuff right now. And that's something I've put my own writing to the side for a long time. Basically, not necessarily by by choice, but just the way it's tended to work out. And so, right now I have written some instrumental music that I'm getting more into. I've been getting it more into, not necessarily just vintage analog synths, but even modern analog synths that follow the vintage, that are really closely inspired. Like I got the OB6, and that's a great piece. But there's also some more boutique synths, if you will, that I've been pursuing. Have you heard of the River by Baloran?
No.
That's a guy in France who makes this sort of 8-voice polyphonic analog that's basically, it's sort of inspired by the Moog source.
Okay.
But it's like, imagine if you had an 8-voice Moog source. That's kind of where it comes, but it's got its own thing entirely, and it's got this, it's really an amazing, it's called The River. It's amazing. Anyway, so I've ordered one of those, and I'm hopefully going to get one this year, if he isn't too held back by what's going on in the world. And I love my Oberheims. I have an OBXA, and there's a clone of the OBX that's coming out called the VS1 that I've also have on order too. I'm hoping to evoke some great vintage textures in some of my instrumental music. I'm looking forward to doing that. That's if I get another tour with Steven or Cyndi or anybody else, I'll be out on the road. But for right now, I'm concentrating on composition at least day to day right now, and doing whatever session work I can do in my studio, which is still getting built.
That's right. I think you need to be learning some carpentry, Andy, and do it yourself.
No, those guys are doing it. Those guys. Look, I'm happy to, if they're taking the health precautions that they need to take. I'm happy to give people work.
That's right.
Because Lord knows we're all going to need it.
Yeah,
Exactly.
for sure.
We got to keep the economy going as long as people don't get. We obviously we have to. It's a horrible trade-off. It's a we don't want to get too negative in this interview, but people are facing some of the really awful trade-offs. Do I work and risk illness or getting other people sick, or do I or I go bankrupt? So I'm not in danger of either of those right now. I mean, any more than anyone else is.
No.
Yeah.
So we're all in the same boat. I'm knocking on wood as I speak to you.
Exactly.
Yeah, cool.
I pray everybody stays safe. And we've already lost some artists, and it's hitting New York really hard right now. And some people a few people that I've worked with have already gotten sick, and a few of them unfortunately have passed away. And I hope that the rest of the world is spared what I'm afraid is about to happen in New York. But anyway, keeping hopeful. Most of the people I know are really following the guidelines, and hopefully they're all going to be okay. And hopefully we're all going to come out on the end of this, and people will have had a lot of time to reflect, and hopefully to create art.
That's right.
Yeah, I'm into that.
I'm looking at this as an opportunity, because that's basically what you have to do in a crisis.
Exactly.
You have to find the opportunity. So if I've neglected my own writing, which I have, this is my opportunity to no longer neglect it.
That's right.
And I can really, I'm so busy making a living. I'm so busy jetting around and, doing what we're all doing. We all don't take enough time to reflect and go deep, in this world that we're living. We're all so connected with the internet, which is great. I'm talking to you halfway around the world, but we can get sucked in and then not live our real lives.
That's right.
So easily.
No, it's
Anyway,
definitely.
So I'm trying to do that. I'm not any better at it than anybody else. I'm probably worse at it than many people, but I'm doing my best.
I think we're all in agreement, though, Andy. It's about the music, and that probably leads me to the final question, which is the dreaded Desert Island discs. So,
oh yeah,
can you rattle off your 5 albums you couldn't live without? With the usual disclaimer, everyone has different ones at different periods of time, but just throw 5 at us.
All right. Well, I'm going to have to. Okay. All right. So we're going to start with. I'll start with Bill Evans. Everybody digs Bill Evans.
Yep.
That's a great record. Does a box set? Can I do a box set, or does it have to be a single?
No, you can do a box set if you need to. That's fine.
All right, that's easy. All right, I'll cover my classic pop then. Beatles in mono box set.
Oh, yeah.
That's
Good
every
call.
Beatles record in. All right, so you can't argue with that. Holst, The Planets. Okay, any decent recording of that?
Yep.
What am I up to? 3.
Yep.
All right, now I'm choosing here. All right, I'm going to say. So I've already did my Beatles. All right, so Dr. John plays Mac Rebennack.
Okay.
I'm hoping I have a piano. Do I get to have a piano on the desert island so I can at least play?
Yeah,
and I can,
of course.
prog. All right, and then some kind of prog rock because I love my prog too. Gentle Giant, The Power and the Glory.
There you go. That definitely will keep you entertained, particularly if you do have your piano.
Exactly. So at least I can transcribe it, right?
That's right. I mean, we're all on a bit of a desert island at the moment, and we do have our piano, so that's what counts. But Andy,
that's right.
Thanks so much for taking the time. It's greatly, greatly appreciated, and wish you the best over the coming months, and look forward to seeing you back out on the road in 2021. Yeah,
well, you too, and hope you guys all stay safe and healthy, and all your loved ones stay safe and healthy, and I do hope to be out there. I hope to come back to your fantastic country at some point. I've been there 4 times, and I loved every time.
So there we have it. I enjoyed the hell out of that, Paul. What about you?
Yeah, it was really, really great. And Andy obviously is a passionate guy, and he's very generous with his time and his thoughts. And so for me, that was quite inspirational and motivational to learn a little bit from him and some of the great experiences he's had.
And it shows you the level of both his proficiency and his courage, that not that the hypothetical is that likely to ever happen, because I hope that Charlie and Roy never do get sick and need replacing for a night. But I reckon he would step up and he'd do a great job.
I certainly wouldn't bet against him.
No, that's right. So, yes, that's it for this show. We'll be back again in a fortnight or so, but just a reminder that you can keep in touch via a few means. So our website is www.keyboardchronicles.com. We've got our little Facebook page at Keyboard Chronicles, and we're also on Twitter, and love your feedback there at the Keyboard CHR1. Always keen to hear from you via email as well, and that's editor@keyboardchronicles.com. So a huge thank you again to you, sir, for joining me again this episode.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to be asked to co-host.
And I know you're back for next one. And most importantly, thanks to everyone out there for listening. We do appreciate the feedback we get, and our worldwide audience. It's always lovely to get feedback from people in the US and France and UK and Canada, all over the place. So yeah, hope to see you back here next episode.